I have got my shoulders out on the channel. I did kind of trim that. They're still very hairy. Anyway, it's hot here. That's why the shoulders are making an appearance. Hey, Spuds, how's it going? It's Jamie. Welcome back to another video first on the channel. I don't know, but welcome either way. I'm very glad to have you here. How are you all doing? My voice is sounding a bit weird. It wasn't sounding weird 10 minutes ago, and now it's sounding weird. Today, we're looking at some posts on the subreddit about honest transgender. And the way I would interpret this is like unpopular opinions maybe, or like maybe somewhat controversial opinions, or just like questions that people don't normally ask. I don't know, but that kind of vibe of like trans people doing the asking and maybe having opinions that are not fully shared with the rest of the trans community, or just sharing like some of their feelings about being trans. And I just thought we could go through some of them and use them as like jumping off points for a discussion about various different topics about being trans. So are you ready? Anybody else want a transgender day of invisibility this year? I don't think a day has gone by where we haven't been visible with this administration. I do hear that, and I feel like in the States in particular, the UK is not fantastic, but it is somewhat better. It's tricky, isn't it? Because it feels like there's not been a day gone by where the trans community hasn't been in some form of spotlight, a lot of it negative, but is it still good to have this day for representation and visibility that has a completely positive connotation and is all about uplifting the community and showing people that you're not alone, we are here, we should not be ignored, all of this stuff? I feel like it's important. I personally do like Trans Day of Visibility. It's the 31st of March every year. I can see where this would be coming from, but it's not something I share. That was this day every year until circa 2009. The insistence on visibility by the transgender movement has been a disaster for trans sex people. Honestly, this just gives me bad vibes. I do not agree with this. Yes, we have come from a time where representation and visibility was pretty much like nothing. However, I think to try and separate like the terms transsexual and transgender into two vastly different groups and try to be like,
yeah, transgender people, the ones who identify as transgender, are to blame for all this negative attention.
And
the movement of trans people has been a disaster for like the OG transes.
That's what this feels like. I really do push back on that. But I think it's the same thing where like there was this wave of like non-binary phobia from binary trans people where they were like,
oh, it's non-binary people that are meaning that the cis people aren't accepting us trans people.
And it's like, no, it's the cis people that aren't accepting. It's got nothing to do with the visibility. It's got nothing to do with the difference in identities. Cis people who don't want to accept the trans community will use any excuse they find, and there is no point fighting against each other. This just feels like unnecessary, victim blaming. Like, oh, transgender people, because you wanted visibility, it's your fault that everything's gone to shit. No, it's people like Trump's fault. It's people like J.K. Rowling's fault. It's people like all the TERFs and all the transphobes and all the shitty politicians out there. That's whose fault it is, not the trans communities, or not a subsection of the trans community that you don't view yourself as being part of. So let's stop blaming each other and realize that the LGBTQ plus people, trans people wanting visibility and representation, they are not the ones to blame for the current state of affairs. And I think it's very unfair to put the blame there. Hard to disagree. Seriously considering detransitioning after 3-ish years because being trans just sucks so much. Both not transitioning and transitioning suck, and I feel like I'm weighing the options again after years. Is it worth to give up the happiness I get from being a woman to live with the comfort and joy I could get from being a cis-het man? I'm not sure, but maybe. Either way, I'm unhappy. I think this is very devastating. It's very sad. Also highlights the #1 reason why trans people detransition, and that's a lack of social support, feelings of a lack of safety, feeling like they're not in the right place to be openly trans or have anybody know that they're trans because they don't feel able to do that. They don't feel safe in that situation. And I can totally see why, with all of the shit getting thrown at the trans community, particularly trans women right now, why somebody would want to weigh up the happiness they get from living as their true self versus the safety they get from hiding who they are, and being like, both suck, because one sucks because I'm discriminated against, my rights are taken away and I feel unsafe, and the other sucks because I'm not living as my true self, and that is a really difficult thing to do. It is that classic like rock on a hard place situation, and I think it's really important to highlight how many like real people feel like this. The main reason why people detransition is because of transphobes, and transphobes are like,
it's all just a phase, you'll regret it one day, you'll detransition.
and it's like, maybe, And the most likely reason for that detransition would be people like you, as in the transphobes, not you, lovely person watching this. Unless you're a transphobe. What are you doing on this channel? Though thank you for the view, it helps. A comment on that post was, only you can decide, and to be real, you have to decide what will bring you peace and do that. Speaking for myself, I started transition because I had to find out, then I detransitioned because it was my choice, and now I'm retransitioning, but with more experience and knowledge and support. I think that's such a key thing. My point on the last part is that it's okay to try a few things, see where they go, how they make you feel, and adjust your life strategy accordingly. There is no playbook, everyone is unique and different. You absolutely have to do the thing that feels right for you in the time and space you're in and in the context that you're living. Maybe one way that makes it easier is if right now a trans person, just talking about it in a more broad sense, if a trans person is not feeling safe or able or like they have enough support around them to live as their true self, as hard as it would be to detransition, it could be done with the mindset of, and I'm going to try and get myself into as best a position I can to retransition. I'm going to try and get myself into like a supportive friendship network or into this different scenario or move to this different place that is more open-minded or get out of this specific household and then retransition when you are in a better position. So it could be seen as like a temporary detransition to provide yourself a little bubble of safety right now. And I don't think there should be any shame in that. Do you think these are some of the reasons preventing cis people from seeing trans people, particularly trans women, in a more positive light? Not my comment, but someone else's in another sub. They listed a few reasons they thought were hindering trans acceptance. Do you know what is hindering trans acceptance? This list should be 1 point long, and it should just be like a little summary about ignorance and bigotry and not wanting to accept something that you didn't grow up learning about or that you don't understand. Like the first comment of like, it's not trans people's fault that there are cis people out there who will not accept us. Trans people do not exist to make ourselves more palatable to cis people. What we see when that happening is these transphobic trans people like Blair White who are pandering to right-wing bigots. I don't know if she actually believes what she says or if it's being done for some kind of self-saving thing, but there are multiple trans people who do this, and this kind of comment of like, are there things the trans community can be doing to make themselves more easy to accept, feels like a soft version of what these transphobic trans people are doing, where they're like,
okay, well, clearly I need to do this to be more palatable.
no, we shouldn't need to do anything but live our lives. There is nothing wrong with being trans. Like, you don't have to make it more palatable to cis people. This should be a list of things of like, what can cis people do to help them understand better and be more open-minded towards the trans community. It's not trans people's responsibility. Some trans women have demanded society in general accept the following. I have a feeling that this is either going to be perfectly reasonable things or absolutely made up things. Mandatory affirmative only pediatric gender treatment, despite the high percentage of desisters and growing number of detransitioners, despite WPATH being clearly ideologically compromised, despite the evidence base for the Dutch protocol being quite weak, and despite the fact that those Dutch studies had very stringent entry requirements, which subsequent clinicians have ignored. Okay, we're going to break this down point by point. We might be a little while on this question. So mandatory affirmative only pediatric gender treatment. The alternative to the affirmative approach is reparative therapy, which is just a nicer way of saying conversion therapy. Conversion therapy does not work for any LGBTQ+ person. So yes, the affirmative approach is the way to go. It is the medically and scientifically evidence-based direction for trans people of all ages, and there is age-appropriate steps within this gender affirmative approach, depending on whether you are a child, adolescent, an adult, whatever. With pediatric gender treatment, when we're talking about children, it will be things like socially transition, it will be talking therapy, it will be changing name and pronouns and going to school as their correct gender. When they get a bit older, it might be puberty blockers, although those are incredibly restricted, despite still being available for cis kids with precocious puberty and being a medical treatment for children for decades. For some reason, there's a problem when it comes to using them on trans kids, and that's transphobia. It's not anything medically based. Come back to me and talk to me about the dangers of puberty blockers when they are banned as a medication altogether because they are actually fundamentally problematic. Right now, they are being restricted for trans kids only. They are still a readily available medication for children who have precocious puberty. Children are still having access to this medication, meaning that it's not the medication, it's transphobia. Anyway, high percentages of desisters, those studies have been debunked, and more recent studies absolutely show 97.5% persistence rate among trans kids across like a 5-year follow-up. And these studies that show the desistance rates have been looked into and found to have been methodologically flawed. One example of a flaw, the kids that did not take part in the follow-up were automatically marked as desisted. They have no idea what happened to those kids. They very well could have carried on their transitions and just not wanted to take part in research anymore, but they were classed as desisters. You can't just do that. You can't just be like,
oh, look, 30% of my participants have not shown up for round 2. Let's just mark them as this category.
They need to be categorized separately as people who did not show up. That's like the attrition rate or something. Growing number of detransitioners, where are these numbers? All of the figures that are still coming out in these papers are in the very, very low percentages around the 1% mark, which, just as a reminder, the overall regret rate for surgeries generally is 14.4%. Every single medical procedure has a regret rate of some level, and the regret rate we find in gender affirmative treatment and trans people is so incredibly low compared to all of these other medical regret rates. It's actually a fantastic regret rate. It's just held to an entirely different standard because it's trans people. The W path being clearly ideologically compromised. I feel like at this point, people are going,
ideologically compromised, ideologically driven.
Just when people are like, hey, here's what the science says about trans people, or we're a trans supportive organization.
You're ideologically driven.
The people who are shouting that places like the W path and trans people generally and any scientific research that comes out in support of trans people is ideologically driven, they are ideologically driven. It's just so bananas to me. I'm sorry. It frustrates me. The W path is clearly ideologically compromised. How? And then a big statement about problems with the Dutch-based protocol. And none of this has any backing. Where is this information? Number 2, that cisgender lesbians accept them as no different to themselves and basically let them take over the lesbian subculture because transbians are triple oppressed and cis lesbians are only double oppressed. You know how the progressive stack works. This person is the one playing Oppression Olympics. It is true that trans women face discrimination for being both women and being trans. So a trans woman lesbian would face discrimination for being a woman, for being trans, and for being a lesbian. But as I said, we're not playing Oppression Olympics here. I feel like what's happened here is somebody seen 1, maybe 2 trans women say something along these lines and gone,
oh, this is what trans lesbians want, to take over lesbian subculture.
where? And also, this is just very wrong because cis lesbians are the most accepting group of the trans community. There's only 3% that are not accepting of trans people. So I don't know who said this. I'm very surprised. Maybe one of those 3%, or maybe somebody straight who's like, I'm gonna stand up for the lesbians, and then actually hasn't. The whole no different thing. Trans is an adjective, and being trans is just a different way of being human. Being a trans man doesn't make you any less of a man, and being a trans woman doesn't make you any less of a woman. We need to move away from this this is exactly what biology has to be, and this is what it means if it's this way, because we're learning so much more about human variants. And what about intersex people as well? They always just get forgotten in this conversation. It's oh no, anomaly, but they're as common as ginger people, and trans people are very rare. So I just don't get that argument. No different to themselves. I've never met a trans person who thinks that they are identical to a cis person of the same gender. I recognize that there are differences between me and a cis man, but a cis man is still a man, and I'm still a man regardless of whether I'm trans or not. I think most trans people acknowledge that there is some difference, but again, it's an adjective. It's just there are so many other things that make us different from other people who are under another umbrella as part of our identity. So we can have an umbrella of women, and we can have tall women and short women and blonde-haired women and black women and trans women and cis women. I don't really understand why trans women are the only ones that would get called out to be you're trying to take over lesbian culture. It's just bizarre. Number 3, that one should be able to change their legal sex upon simply self-identifying as the opposite sex, regardless of how far along in the transition process one is. And even asking about whether or not this might enable some bad actors is just transphobia. Asking because you have no idea is fine, but asking and then doubling down when somebody gives you the answer and the evidence to show that this isn't happening. Predatory cis men are not pretending to be women to go into women's spaces. Say that again. Like, a straight predatory cis man who wants to attack women is not pretending to be a woman to access those spaces. One, because would you really imagine that that kind of man would want to display any kind of femininity? Two, because he doesn't need to. And that is the really sad reality, that trans people are being scapegoated within the broader conversation of predatory cis men who are a problem in society generally, not just within women's spaces. And actually, public spaces like this are way down on the list of where women are actually being attacked. It's like open spaces at night, such as parking lots, but the most common place is in their own home or in somebody else's home. Nobody's calling that out. Like, we're having the wrong discussions here. So yeah, if you ask and then double down, I'm just going to think that you don't like trans people, especially as there's no evidence that allowing trans people to live their lives and access the correct spaces and identify as themselves increases any risk to anybody. All it does is make trans people happier. So if you have a problem with that, then just say it. Number 4, that women's only beauty services should be forced by the government to accommodate the waxing of a trans woman's scrotum. I have never seen this even be a discussion. This sounds the same as the people who are like,
oh, like trans women are gonna go and stand to pee in the women's bathroom and leave the door open and show everybody their genitals.
no, they're not. They're really not. Like, you're not gonna find a trans woman who will just walk in and be like, ta-da. But I also think that this is just one of these like manipulative, like made up things that maybe they've heard one trans person say and they're like, oh my god. Number 5, the whole trans sports fiasco. For the record, we need as much study on this subject as possible to determine the appropriate solution. We may need natal male, natal female, trans femme and trans masc leagues, and that's just the adult issue. Things get more complicated when we're dealing with children. But you do realize that this has gone really far, where like little kids just in school wanting to play team sports, trans kids are just being left out. And trans women have been able to compete in the women's category at the Olympics since 2004. For nearly 2 decades, nobody had an issue. There was no domination. In that entire time, there's only been like 2 trans women competing. Neither won a medal, and this isn't to shit on trans women's ability at sports, but like, I mean, the access to resources for trans people is going to be incredibly low, and that is one of the most important things when it comes to performance at elite level. Also forgetting that at elite level, everybody has to pass certain tests in order to compete. And also, the playing field isn't level. The reason why there are elite athletes, one is most likely because they've had access to equipment and training and time and all of this stuff and a coach and things like that. And the second is because look at people like Michael Phelps. He has huge biological advantages. That's why he's so great at swimming. Did anybody call him out? Elite sports are not a level playing field. Saying all of that, there has been research that's found that at elite levels, trans women do not have a biological advantage over cis women. So yes, if you are interested in there being more research, have a look at the stuff that's already been done as well. Number 6, that if you disagree with trans activists, any of the above, you are morally akin to Hitler and deserve to lose your job. I feel like this is said by people who think they've gone,
Sorry, I just have a little question. Like, what pronoun should I use for you? Like, what's your identity?
and they feel like somebody's then
Oh my god, you're so transphobic, fired.
and actually what they've done is like used a slur or been like,
I'm not using your correct pronouns. I don't accept you as trans. Like,
they've been shitty. They've done something that deserves a response. I mean, this just feels very like it's pointed towards 2 people in particular I can think of that are prominent TERFs in the UK. If you disagree, I'm assuming they mean on any of the above. I mean, I wouldn't say that you're akin to Hitler and deserve to lose your job. You deserve to lose your job if you're discriminating against a trans colleague. You're morally akin to Hitler if you share some of his world beliefs and want to eradicate the world of a certain marginalized community. Doesn't need to be the same one that Hitler was going after, but you know. So there's definitely some transphobes who do fall into those categories based on what they've been saying. But if you disagree with trans people, like, you are transphobic if you don't think that trans people are their gender, if you don't think that trans people deserve equal rights, if you don't think that trans people deserve access to public spaces, then that is transphobic because you're being discriminatory and prejudiced towards trans people and showing a dislike towards trans people. No, not all trans women are or were complicit in these things, nor are all of those complicit in these things trans women. So the person who reposted this has said, do you believe any of these points have merit? If so, which ones, and how do we go about addressing them? I'm very interested to read some comments from other people about this one. I'm going to be very short in my response. No. So somebody to the answer of, do you think these are some reasons preventing cis people from seeing trans people, particularly trans women, in a more positive light? Very short in my answer, no. Cis people are the reason cis people are not seeing trans people correctly. As many have already shown, it is likely correct that the misinformation you just presented are reasons that many cis people get tricked into viewing trans people in a less positive light. Some real quick things not already covered. WPath is indeed ideologically compromised. It is far too conservative, but that's a compromise we all appreciate so that there's at least some communication between us and the rest of you. I think they're doing a good job at that purpose, and they've given the Republicans many consolations already. For the lesbians, there are an estimated 56 million lesbians in the world. There are an estimated 463,300 trans lesbians in the world. 500,000 isn't taking over 56 million anytime ever. The fearmongering of taking over anything are usually easily seen as the ridiculous threats they are when you look at things objectively. Legal sex and biological sex are not the same thing. How far along changing our biological sex do you believe we should be before changing our legal sex? It's a very good point. Are you referring to beauty salons that are doing purely cosmetic waxing, or are you referring to places that do medical hair removal? Is government insurance involved anywhere? That is also a very good point that I was not aware of. Could this be hair removal places? So for trans women prepping for lower surgery, they would most likely need to have some form of hair removal done in various different areas. The average cis person I meet in my day-to-day life has likely never considered most of these things, lol. This whole list is a bunch of sad rage bait bullshit. There is no merit to any of them. Look into the data for desisters as an example. The idea that a large number of youth grow out of dysphoria is a myth created by Kenneth Zucker, who agreed with reparative therapy. If you're significantly taller than the female average, you're never going to be able to go stealth no matter what. I'm assuming this is about trans women. Interesting. I have my thoughts about height and stuff, and I will share in a minute. I'm going to read it first. I'm 6'2", so I know this pain very well. I am much, much taller than the average female in any country, and there is no hope of me ever going stealth without experimental surgeries that don't exist yet and probably never will. You can't compare yourself to tall cis women. First, they went through female puberty, not male puberty, as you and me did. That immediately makes you more masculine and even harder to pass. Just look at any tall woman community and see how tall women, even not as tall as me, often complain about being called trans or just men. I can't accept this fact, and I don't know if I ever will. I feel like there is so much individual variation. Yes, tall cis women can get called masculine, can get called men, and in more recent years can get accused of being trans women when using public facilities. Just like masculine cis women can be accused of all of those things. And then particularly cis women who are both very tall, masculine, and built quite broad. They exist. There is so much variation within humans. I'm not trying to deny this person's feelings. They are entirely valid, and I hear it. I do think the comparison between trans women and cis women is slightly skewed because this is coming from a trans woman. So I want to offer like an outside perspective, and if you disagree, that is fine. I totally appreciate that. I am not a trans woman, so I'm not trying to speak over them. I just think that as somebody who was presenting as a 6'1" cis woman, my body shape has changed, but I was always broad-shouldered. I've never been super curvy. I've never been super feminine, and I did experience people calling me masculine, calling me a man. I had the T-slur chanted at me in like year 7 secondary school when I was like 11. I had no idea what it meant. Clearly my classmates knew something about me before I did, but I've had that experience of moving through the world as a much taller than average woman. And I do hear that due to going through a testosterone-driven puberty, trans women on average will have a harder time. Like a tall trans woman will have a harder time than a tall cis woman. But I still think it comes down so much to individual variation. And the poster saying something about like ever going stealth without experimental surgeries that don't exist yet, that indicates to me that maybe they feel like if they were 5'5" and took hormones and had the surgeries they felt like they wanted to have that are currently available, they feel like they could go stealth, which is basically where people don't know you're trans in your day-to-day life. And I think if that is the case, I personally don't think that being over 6 foot prevents that from happening. It just means that you will also likely get the same kind of comments that a taller than average cis woman will get. And that will likely hit a lot closer to home as a trans woman than it would as a cis woman, because dysphoria feelings and transitioning feelings and passing feelings and all of this. I don't want to see somebody giving up hope, because I don't think height this is the be all and end all. 5'11" AFAB here, ironically never been called a man, even though there's nothing I want more. My ex is a 6'2" trans woman, and my entire friend circle, mostly cis men, were surprised to find out she's trans. Known multiple 6'+ cis women in my lifetime, and universally the reaction from people around them has been, whoa, you're tall, rather than you're not a real woman. Yeah, you get fewer cis women in the upper height echelons, but that doesn't mean they don't exist or that you're cooked for being as tall as you are. Add 5 inches and I'd understand the gripe. But I mean, there are cis women who are 6'7", but being 6'7", whether you're AFAB or AMAB, is extraordinarily tall and will make you stand out in pretty much any room you go into. I have a family member who is 6'7+, and they get a lot of attention for it. Before I transitioned, I got so much attention for my height. Every single new person I met would comment on how tall I was, and now it's just, oh, you're a height. Cool, good for you. I also feel it's so hard to detach myself from like being trans and having the knowledge I have about being trans. But if I try to do that for a second, most cis people have like very little to no knowledge really of the trans community. Most cis people probably feel like they've never met a trans person. I do not think that your average cis person's first response when they see a 6 foot tall plus woman is to go, oh, they must be trans. Yes, dicks may call her a man or masculine or say something about her height, but a majority of people will just be like, you are a tall woman. Sometimes as trans people, like the only thing I can relate this to is my body shape. I feel like is not like fully typical of a cis man, but I need to keep reminding myself that like there's a lot of cis men with very similar body shapes, including the cis men in my literal family, which would explain why I have this body shape. I need to detach it from being trans. Like, not everything about me that I'm not comfortable with is because I'm trans, and not everything about me that I'm not comfortable with would mean somebody would read me as being trans, if that makes sense. So a trans woman being self-conscious about her height, it's gonna feel like that's gonna be the thing. If people see you and you are over 6 foot, that's why people are gonna think you're trans. But actually, I think significantly less people than you would ever imagine would even have that cross their minds, let alone it be something they would voice. I really don't want this person to like feel hopeless just because they're tall. I can see where like height dysphoria would come into play, and I think that is playing a big role in how this person views their height. I'm 6'5" and transitioned over 11 years ago, and it has been 10+ years since anyone has misgendered me that didn't know me before I transitioned, and I currently live in a very red state, Tennessee, for the last 3 years. Tall women exist, and I personally know 5 cis women as tall or taller than me. One being somewhat famous Lindsay Hayward, who is 6'8". She was 6'9" prior to back surgery she had 10 years ago. Yes, there is more scrutiny being a tall woman, but no, it does not prevent you from being stealth. As long as your looks, voice, and mannerisms are spot on, you should not have an issue. Sure, there might be some dumbass that thinks tall women are trans, like the 6'4" cis queer woman in a Lake City, Florida Walmart a few weeks ago, but those are the exception and should not affect your ability to go stealth. It takes confidence and work to transition, but it is possible when tall. My wife and I just took a cruise and drove down to Florida to spend time with my niece, brother, and parents for a week, and then a week-long cruise. I had zero issues with public bathrooms or anything. Ironically, I was driving through Lake City, Florida a few days after that Walmart incident and stopped at a nearby rest area off I-75 with, again, zero issues. Focus on being you, and remember, tall women exist. They do. And the opposite of this is short men exist. I know a lot of trans men in my life who are between 5 foot and 5'5" who feel really uncomfortable, and I don't know if any of them have felt it impacts them being able to be stealth. But I'm sure there are shorter trans men out there who do feel that. But there are so many shorter cis men. When I see a shorter man in public, and I don't know if he's cis or trans, even as a trans person, my first thought is never, oh, he might be trans. I never connect the height. No point in transing after 21. Transing. Already from the title, I entirely disagree, but it's labeled as a vent. So I feel like somebody's just having a bit of a like moment, prolonged or otherwise, and they just wanted to share some feelings. But I think it's a good thing to talk about because a lot of people are like, there's no point in me transitioning because I'm too old. So let's have a chat. I don't really think there is much point in transitioning once you're past 21, as it is very unlikely you will pass. I joined the wrong groups and was told that if I did HRT and FFS that I would pass, and here I am 2 years later, not passing with having done FFS and 2 years on HRT. My FFS is fine, but I look the same from the front, but my side profile is really good now. I think sometimes it doesn't work like me. I'm so sad I spent so much money and invested so much of myself into this. It's a shame that this person feels this way. I would say 2 years is still quite early days. I know significantly less about the timescale or like kind of length of changes caused by estrogen as I do about testosterone, but I know that I looked vastly different at like 5 years on T compared to 2 years, and at 10 years compared to 5 years, and it has this prolonged building effect. I still feel like 2 years is very early days. Having friends that told you that having HRT and FFS meant that you would pass is unfair, because I don't think we can ever say that about somebody pre-transition. HRT and surgeries can help you to be able to live as your true self and be gendered correctly, at least some of the time, to a majority of the time, but it's never a guarantee. The transitioning process and what you want to do within that has to come from within, with the expectation that it can make you feel more comfortable about yourself, reduce things like dysphoria, and it can help you be gendered correctly. And for most people, it does impact that for the positive, at least to some extent, but it's never a guarantee. That is more down to you as an individual and your genetics and how you respond to HRT, what surgeries you get, who does them, whether you have revisions, the results of those, blah, 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 blah. All of those things factor into this rather than age. Some people can transition as teenagers and not be gendered correctly as much as somebody who transitions in their 30s. And I do think it's a really dangerous message. I completely understand that for this person it's coming from a point of personal pain. So I'm not calling them out personally for this stance. I just think generally sending a message out of being like there's no point transitioning after a certain age to the trans community is a very dangerous one, because so many people have that ingrained. There's never a guarantee, but you've got to do what feels right for you and what you think is going to make you feel more comfortable with yourself. Do it for you first and foremost. 21 is also really young. I've never heard somebody say as young as 21. I've heard somebody be like, oh, as soon as you're out your 20s and you're 30 plus, no point. I've heard that quite a few times. I also disagree with that. I've seen many people who started transitioning in their 30s, 40s, 50s, even older, and who get misgendered less than people who transitioned in their 20s, because it all depends on the individual and what stages of transition you do and how your body reacts to HRT. I don't think it's fair to put out a message there to make people feel like there's ever a maximum age for transitioning. You got to do what's right for you. And if you figure out you're trans when you are 57 years old and you want to transition and that's what you need to do with your life and that's what's going to make you happier and more comfortable, do not feel like you're too old, because you aren't. I'm really sorry that for this person they feel like it's not gone the way they want, but I think there's so much more time for HRT to cause changes, and there's also multiple options in terms of follow-up surgery if that's something they want to do. The truth about the transgender ideology movement, you just know this is gonna be bad. The truth about the transgender ideology movement. The gay rights movement convinced the public that homosexuality was not degenerate and was to be accepted. They won the debate. Yes, there was Stonewall, etc., but the main catalyst was years and years of positive, charismatic, and intelligent gay representation. I mean, just off the top of my head, the first Pride was a protest. Bricks were thrown at Stonewall. Somebody threw a pie in the face of Anita Bryant, a very prolific homophobe from the 70s. Like, no, the trans ideology movement doesn't care about these things. They have no self-awareness as to their optics. They won't even engage in a conversation because it questions their right to exist. How can you expect to advance your rights if you can't even explain why you need them? This is bullshit. I feel like this has come from a cis gay person who's like,
oh, see, no, we did it right. We politely asked for our rights and we sat down and we had calm conversations, and that's how we got here.
No, it is not. You are denying the history of the gay rights movement, also denying the role of trans people within that movement. Trans people are not allowed a platform at the minute. We're not at a point where we are allowed to have positive, charismatic, intelligent trans representation for more than just a one-off morning show once in a blue moon. It's always posed as a debate. It's totally fair that trans people do not want to constantly go on and have to debate their right to exist. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to debate my right to exist is not a refusal to consider optics or to educate the public. It's the exact opposite. Avoiding bad faith debates with anti-trans activists allows trans activists to focus on setting their own narratives, educate the public on their terms, and answer good faith questions for normal people who are actually confused, instead of just getting sea-lined by some disingenuous weirdo like Matt Walsh. Why should trans people put themselves in those situations? There are so many trans people who are living their lives, just representing themselves and their community, talking to politicians, talking to people on the ground and trying to help. I just feel like the OP on this one is completely ignoring all of the good work the trans community is actually doing, and also denying the fact that protests and not always asking politely for our rights is really important. People don't listen. If they don't want to give you your rights, they're not going to listen to you asking politely. We're not at that stage yet. Also, yes, the gay rights movement did do lots of public relations work along with the riots, protests, boycotts, throwing a pie at Anita Bryant, etc. etc. They used a diversity of tactics like all successful movements and like the trans movement is doing. But like I said, we're not at a point yet where you're seeing trans people in mainstream media in a huge way without it being some kind of debate still. I feel like we're making a bit of progress, but there's still a long way to go. This sort of tripe was said about gay people and pretty much every other marginalized demographic in history. It's honestly baffling to me that cis people think these takes are somehow interesting or novel. Yeah, this was said about gay people like 20, 30 years ago. And that is it for this first installment of looking at some controversial or less popular trans opinions and questions and statements and beliefs. What did we think of the video? Did you like it? Think about giving a thumbs up and subscribing. Go leave your comments and thoughts down below if you want to add anything to the discussions. If you disagree with me on anything, that is totally fine. Let's all just be nice about it. And you'll see some names going up the screen right now of my Patreons. If you want to go support me on Patreon, that would be very, very lovely and wonderful of you, but there is no pressure. And I also want to give a big shout out to my top tier Patreons: Alba, Chloe, Eldon K, Gosco, Iona Balash, Sienna Lamb, Jesse Entwistle, Marv Mallow, Max Makes Mods, Night Soul, Nesta, Sugar Joe, Rachel Raptor, River Shampoo Mod, Randy, Ry Loves Rory, Sally Drew, TNS Mum, and the third Hat Man. Thank you very much. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Much love. Bye.